Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world that you're joining us for this very first session of Included 2021. One of 6 sessions which will be rolling out live, or perhaps you're watching a little bit later on YouTube as we remember, renew, and reimagine. My name is Chris Halliday. I'm a Salvation Army officer. I'm part of the Included team and one of your hosts today. We'll be meeting Bal, also one of our hosts today, in just a moment. It's really wonderful to see so many people joining us from right across the world. Over these 6 sessions, we really hope to share with you on a journey. We aim to bless, to champion those who have often been ignored, to raise up the voices that are often not heard, to encourage those who are on this same path towards a deeper understanding of where Jesus is calling us as his ambassadors of true welcome, true equity, true inclusion. And we seek to provide a platform to connect ourselves and others around the world. You are indeed at this moment part of a global movement with people connecting in right across the world, and the Included team and those who are participating in presenting today coming from across the globe, from all the way up in Iceland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South America, New Zealand, and here in Australia. Where I am right now is Melbourne, although this land has been known for tens of thousands of years as the Kulin Nation by the Aboriginal people, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, who have cared for and nurtured and been the custodians of these lands for countless generations. Now, the Salvation Army and I acknowledge their custodianship of this land. We acknowledge the deep connection they have to their land, to each other, and to Spirit God, the Creator. We acknowledge the elders of the past and of the present, and we acknowledge the elders who are emerging, and commit ourselves to reconciliation with those Aboriginal people, because of course reconciliation is the way to true inclusion. Now, this year's conference theme was selected because we truly seek to remember, renew, and reimagine. We want to remember, where have we come from? How did we get to where the church's current stands and thoughts are around matters relating to people who are gender or sexuality diverse? What's the history, the teaching? What were the understandings in society and culture? We remember those who have been hurt. We remember the pain. We also remember the joys and the work that has gone on of those who have led the way up until now. We renew our understandings of theology and practice. We renew our thoughts about what it is we're all doing here. And we renew, we break new ground. We embark on new frontiers. We cross new thresholds. We're pioneering new ways to share the all-inclusive love of Christ. We renew our commitment to participate in renewing hearts and minds in the movement of God, renewing our desire to head out to the margins and draw others in, right there on the edges where we find Jesus and where he finds us. And we reimagine. We cry out to God for us to help us reimagine a new way for Christian community to engage in the world. We come as an artist comes to a lump of clay or a blank canvas. We imagine something that maybe others can't yet see. We seek to reflect in this new way, this new imagination of church, We seek to reflect Jesus, the most holy person, who was also the most inclusive person. We believe that to be truly Jesus-centered, to be holy, is to be like Jesus, radically loving, radically accepting, and radically inclusive. Here at the Included team, we long for a church where people can connect to that Jesus. So we begin here in session 1, and we begin the journey by looking back. We're so thankful to our very good friend Kathy Baldock, who's joining us for the second year in a row to kick us off for Included 2021. Kathy's the author of Walking the Bridgeless Canyon. She's the feature of the soon-to-be released movie 1946, and she'll be giving us insights into elements of the past that perhaps we likely wouldn't have otherwise comprehended. This session will be a foundation for us to then renew our thinking and reimagine the future. In this session, we're also going to be chatting to an incredible woman in Norway, Marta Maria Espereth, who until recently was an officer in the Salvation Army, a lifelong covenant that she made, a calling that she received, and something she had to relinquish quite recently when she met the woman that she fell in love with, and who, only 2 weeks ago, got married to. We look forward to hearing and sharing with Marta Maria this morning also. Throughout the sessions, if you're joining us live, there's going to be an opportunity to engage in Q&A in the chat and connect with others in breakout groups. To tell us a little bit more about that, I'm going to pass slightly south of here to Belinda in Tasmania. Hey, Belinda.
Hi, Chris, and hi, everyone. It's good to see you all here this morning. As Chris said, my name is Belinda, or Belle, and I come to you this morning from Padaway Burnie in northwest Tasmania, or La Truita, and it's the home of the Palawa people. And I join Chris in acknowledging elders past, present and future from our Indigenous folk. So a little bit about our chat to start with, I guess. The chat function is there and it is available and you can use it. We've got a really helpful team member who's going to be monitoring that and feeding through any questions as we go. Just so that everyone's aware, for everyone's safety in this space, that is going to be, it's a hidden chat. So don't be surprised if you're not seeing everyone's dialogue coming up, but the answers that come through, Mark's going to be maintaining our chat there, and he's going to answer your questions as he can as we go through. His answers are going to be there and they'll be available. When we move into our breakout rooms later on, that's optional, but we'd love you to stay. It'd be wonderful to have you in that space. The whole purpose of our breakout rooms and the reason that we've got them today, it's really to provide this interactive space for conversation and connection. That's where we can extend on the conversation and talk about what we've learnt from Kathy in particular, but also everything that we've learnt in our session this morning. It's a space to allow us all to continue in our learning and to listen and learn from each other, where different voices are equal in that chat space, in that breakout space. And it's to give members of the LGBTQI+ community a safe space to share experiences as well. So with that, if we can just, I guess, be mindful and be aware that that's a respectful space for all of us. Yeah, and more about that, you'll hear more from your facilitators when we move into our breakout spaces. We've got some facilitators and they're going to be really excited to guide you through the conversations in those breakout spaces. I'm going to hand over now, I think, because we'll go into more details about the breakout space when we move into them, and just aware of keeping us moving along so that we've got lots of time to hear from our wonderful guests this morning. But right now I want to hand over to Jeroen, who's going to lead us in a time of prayer.
Yes, here I am. Hello, nice to meet you from all around the world. And I'd like to say a prayer before we start and hand over to the main speaker. So let's pray together. Dear Lord, we want to thank you that we are here together all around the world, connected with each other and looking for connection, a safe space for inclusion, for everything that you want to give to us. We thank you for all the diversity that you give to us, for all the good things and all the blessings that you give to us, for your amazing grace, and for the start of this meeting and for the meetings that will follow. We pray that you will guide us and help us in remember, renew, and reimagine the things that you have given to us. Thank you for all the preparations that has been made for all the people who are available to speak and to participate in these meetings. And we pray your blessing upon them. We pray for all the people who will speak and who will guide us in thoughts. And we thank you for all the gifts that you have given to them. We pray your blessing upon this meeting. In the name of Jesus, amen.
While mothers and fathers weep for the inclusivity of their LGBTQIA+ child, as they do now, I'll fight.
For the little child who wants to dress differently to the other boys and girls at school, who identifies as a different gender to that which they were assigned at birth, I'll fight.
While gay and lesbian couples madly in love seek to find ways to be loved and peacefully married as they do now, I'll fight.
While our Black, Asian and multi-ethnic siblings face hate and prejudice and online abuse as they do now, I'll fight.
While abuse and racial slurs are being said on social media and towards people in our streets, as there is right now, I'll fight.
While there remains one soul, loved and created by God, who is not included and given the freedom to be who they were created to be, then I'll fight.
I'll fight till the very end.
Wow, fantastic framing for us as we renew our thinking, as we remember and as we reimagine. Thanks to the team for that incredible take on Booth's famous "I'll fight" speech. May that be the rallying cry for us all. Well, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you now a woman who is probably still celebrating a fantastic event of getting married just a couple of weeks ago, all the way in Norway. It's wonderful to welcome Martha Maria. Hey.
Hello, Chris and everyone. Hello.
It's
nice
fantastic.
to be
here. Yeah, fantastic to join with you.
Thank you.
Martha Maria, it's you've had quite a journey over this past couple of years, but certainly over your life, and it started a long time ago as you begun this journey into officership and belonging and finding yourself in Christ. Could you start and introduce yourself with where you are and maybe what you do, and then talk to us a little bit about some of those early days as you experienced Jesus and felt the call into officership?
Yeah. My name is Martha Maria. I live in Oslo, Norway. I now work at the Salvation Army Territorial Headquarters as head of research. I have been an officer for some years in two periods. And I have been a Salvationist and a junior soldier and a soldier in the Salvation Army for over 50 years. I still remember the day in 1968 that I was, when I was enrolled as a junior soldier. And I have since then knew that the Salvation Army is my church, it's my place, it's my place of service. And I have, from that day, I have experienced the call from God to serve Him in the Salvation Army.
Wow.
And I'm educated as a teacher first, and then I have done lots of things through my life. And I went to Officers Training College in 1986. No, I was in 1984, and I was finished in 1986. And after 6 years service as an officer, I met the man which I fell in love with and married. He died 3 years ago. And but since I was young, since I was 19, 20 years old, I knew that I could love a woman, and I had an early experience of that. And then, yeah, and that was a good experience, but I didn't do more about it. And 32 years old, I married, and I had a good life together with my husband, who died 3 years ago. But when I got alone, and all the times, all this time, I often have had the thoughts: what about me? What about now? What about my life? What is that going to be? And that became very clear for me when I got alone, got a widow 3 years ago. And then I met Karen, who is now my wife. I met her, and when we met through close fellow friends, I knew that this is us. It has to be us for the rest of my life. And I was an officer, and I knew the rules and the regulations. I have a good friend who went through this process 15 years ago, and I knew this will hurt, this will be difficult. And I told the Salvation Army, the leadership, that I do not want to leave officership. I want to be an officer. I want to be a soldier of the Salvation Army. I've been that for over 50 years. This is my church. I have experienced God's calling through all my life, both as an officer, as a soldier, as an employee of the Salvation Army, as an employee in the community which I lived in, as a corps leader, as a teacher. But rules are rules, and I am not happy for that. But what I have to say is that I was treated very good, in a very good manner of my leadership. the training principal at the Officers Training College in Norway. He was my leader, and by the Chief Secretary of Norway, Colonel Bente. And we had a good process, but also a very hurtful process.
Yeah.
Chris, you have just to break in.
It's
might talk too much.
No, you're not talking too much. I'm sure everybody like me is absolutely enthralled by your story, and it's so powerful as you share. And we've got to this point now where you've had to make the decision to step away from officership, and while the Army, as you say, was very supportive in your local context, it was obviously still a really heartbreaking choice. Was this something that you talked about with your then partner and your now wife as you started to explore the relationship and what that looked like? Was the idea of having to leave officership present for you throughout?
Yeah. Throughout and from the beginning. And my wife, she is a priest, a minister in the Church of Norway. And she has been an open lesbian for 20 years. And she has been engaged in the movement in the Lutheran churches in Scandinavia to open up. And we have been talking about this the whole time. And she says, what you meet in the Salvation Army now is just like what I experienced in the Church of Norway and in the European Church through 20, 30 years. So, and we had a very common experience of the calling from God. And we also talked, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to, Karen, my wife said to me, we can live a hidden life. We can live as many do's as, share and be good friends, and which is a strong tradition in the Salvation Army with colleagues, women living together. I fully respect that choice. I fully respect that people feel that they have to choose to live hidden, and they choose to live together, to be each other's friends and supporters. But for me, that was never an alternative. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to Karen, who has struggled her things, and I couldn't do that to my officership, to my cadets, to my colleagues, live a hidden life. I couldn't do that. And yeah.
So that, it was obviously a real tension point for you. We can feel that. Hearts are breaking as you tell that story. You know, it's an unimaginable choice that you had to make. How did it feel when you eventually came to make that choice? And if you could talk us through to you're now employed by the Salvation Army as an employee. So if you could talk to us too about what that's like now to still be in the Army, but as an employee, having lost the officership.
When this first started, I contacted some people that I could trust and talk to. I contacted John Wahl in Denmark, and good friends, close friends here in Norway, just to discuss and just find ways. And I also I got a good advice because and I get into fagforening union in Norway, for a union for church ministers and theologians, and I have had good help also from the union, because the laws and the laws of religious freedom is one thing. The laws of to be employed is also something. Churches can choose their ministers, and they can frame their lives. But when you are, we often say as officers, we don't are like others employees, but we are that. We are employees, and and the Salvation Army have to follow national rules and legislations. And I had help, and I was very clear from the beginning that no one should take away from me my calling and my faith. To meet Karen, to fall in love, to meet, to get married, it's a great blessing. It's a joy of my life, and it's very important for me. Also, as important also is to be a part of the Salvation Army. And when the Salvation Army says from the top that lesbian, all those letters, LGBT and all that, are to be included, what does that really mean? And for me, it's important to say that I just want to stay there and be there, and not hide away, and not say excuse me and leave at the back door. So the Salvation Army, I think it would be a scandal of the Salvation Army, and it could be very tough for the Salvation Army in Norway if they just put me on the street and said thank you and goodbye, you have done something wrong, you can't be an officer, and that's all. So we had a very good process of finding a way. I enjoy my work as I love it. I love to I sit close to the commissioner. I sit close to the chief secretary. It's a crazy life, I can say. We sit on the same floor, and I am my office wall to wall with the leadership. And I feel respect. They are great to me. It's still hard to in some settings, it's very difficult. It was very difficult for me, and I couldn't go to the welcome meeting for the new cadets. That I had to stay away from, because I know that if I will be there, I just cry, and so there are many points that are difficult, but I have been also very warm welcome to the Oslo 3 Corps, which I know, and I want to be an active soldier there.
That's great. And so you've been able to remain a soldier through this?
And the point is, because there are some rules and regulations to handle these cases, and TC, the commissioner, the person, what do you call that? The board of the officers review board handled this case, and they did it in an open and good way. I wrote 7 pages to explain and to argue. The officers review board was divided. Half would let me be an officer, half said that we have to follow the regulations, and she can't. And the commissioner, the TC, made the decision, and the decisions is only about my officership. There's no written words about my soldiership. So what I do, I am a soldier until someone, take my name out of the of the soldiers' records. But
well,
I do not, I do at the moment. I do not wear my uniform. I don't want to provoke, and I don't want to make trouble and noise. But I'm not going to throw away my uniform. I'm just.
Good. That's good. You have an incredible, humble heart, and that servant heart and servant spirit that led you to the Salvation Army all those years ago in the 1960s as a junior soldier is still so evident in you today, and the spirit working in you is also evident. We can see that. We can see the joy of the spirit working and alive in you as you share even these difficult stories. Just in this last 30 seconds, Marta Maria, do you have a message or a thought for us or for the Salvation Army as you reflect on all that's taken place and all that's to come?
I think we just have to keep on believing, keep on hoping, keep on working, and keep on fighting, because it has to open up. It's the only possibility, I think, for the Salvation Army to be true to God's, to its mission, to meet people, to preach the gospel and to meet people's need without discrimination. And we just have to keep on and keep believing and keep working. I think that's my word.
Thank you for that. We thank God for you, for your witness, for your strength, for still sticking around and offering yourself in service to Him, even after losing your officership. We're so in awe of the attitude, the determination you bring, and we celebrate with you on your wedding. And do you want to share with people where you've just had your honeymoon?
We had 1 week in Paris. It was wonderful.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to finish. We'll all think about a fabulous honeymoon in Paris.
Yeah.
Marta Maria, it's an absolute blessing and privilege, and I'm sure people around the world watching live or watching later on video are joining in prayer as we seek God's continued blessing upon you and Karin as you embark on this new season of life together. 2 incredibly wonderful, godly women, passionate about Jesus and united, yoked by Him in fellowship, in relationship, and now in marriage. And we pray, God's absolute abundant blessing on your relationship, on your marriage, and join you in faith for all that He'll do in and through you over these next few years. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, as we just sit with that for a moment and reflect on the powerful story and the importance of being an inclusive church. We hear the incredible attention that comes for people who are called by God, who seek to follow Jesus, who seek to live their identity within the church, within, in our context, the Salvation Army. We reflect on the rules and regulations that lead to such a beautiful, godly woman, such as Marta Maria, to have to lose her opportunity to serve in that way, to have someone else break the covenant. We ask ourselves, how did we get here? And to help us explore that question a little bit more, it's fantastic to welcome our guest for today, and I should apologize. Some of you may have heard my frantic typing earlier on. I forgot to mute myself, and we had a little power outage, and we lost Kathy. So I was frantically emailing and texting and typing and WhatsApping to try to grab Kathy back. But thank God, we have Kathy. And it's so good to see you. So good to see you, Kathy.
Hi.
Kathy Baldock, this is your second time with us. We're so thankful. You're also just off the back of a conference with the Reformation Project, which is an organization that you were a part of the very early beginnings of. Of course, we all surely know your book, Walking the Bridgeless Canyon, which has been groundbreaking for so many people in the church, as well as people who are gender or sexuality diverse. The movie's about to come out, 1946, the movie, and you're about to release a brand new book, Forging a Sacred Weapon, How the Bible Became Anti-Gay. You're an incredibly busy woman. You're a woman who's really given yourself to this topic, and we're so thankful to have you join us today.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Absolutely.
Okay. First, I want to say something to Marta Maria. Heartbreaking, but one encouraging thing. This summer, I can't remember what month it was, but sometime this summer, I think at the beginning, so maybe about 4 or 5 months ago, Ed, who is my research partner, and I were on a total of about 10 hours of phone calls with a young lesbian woman in Norway. And she had been asked by the Norwegian Bible Committee to give testimony, to give evidence about the mistranslation of the Bible. And she had been to 2 of my seminars at GCN, QCF, and TRP. And she had developed a friendship with Ed and I. And so she knew she could call and ask us for help. So we spent over 10 hours with her on the phone, prepping her for this meeting with the Norwegian Bible Committee. And and Marta Maria will know the dates, but that Bible has been updated several times. And recently they realized that the last update was not good at all. And so they're looking at it, and the bright spot in this is they record testimony. So they know the testimony that our friend gave before the Bible Committee, the Norwegian Bible Committee, is recorded. And one of the things they're concerned about is they can't just say, oh, we did not know, because now it's recorded. And they know this is a piece of the evidence. So our friend gave wonderful testimony, and she said it was productive and it was heard. So that's good. That's a good spot. I'm trying to move some of this. I'm trying to move some screens here. So Marta Maria, I hope that encourages you, that they are looking at this, and they know they've done some mistranslations of the Bible. So they're looking at it, and they have great input from also a young woman, a lesbian, married Episcopal minister in Norway. So things are happening that maybe you're not hearing about, but things are happening. So yay, okay, yay. It's funny that I actually have some input there in Norway. So what I want to cover today is the next book that I'm writing is Forging a Sacred Weapon. And how this started was I've been teaching for years on my other book. So my other book, I've got a new cover on it, Walking the Bridgeless Canyon. The other cover had yellow, but we're just about to come out with this in Spanish. So we decided to do this cover to match the Spanish cover too. So what I knew was that in 1946 was the first time in any language, in any translation, that the Bible used the word homosexual or homosexuals or homosexuality, any of those variations. And I had been teaching that because I'm always putting things in context of time, I knew that the translation team had all been born between 1870 and 1917. So that tells me who they are and what they understood about human sexuality, what they understood about bodies, about procreation. And so I could pretty easily say that their decision to take the two Greek words in 1 Corinthians 6:9-10, arsenokoitai and malakoi, and combine them into one word, homosexual, it was most likely a ideological and cultural decision and not theology, because there was no theology around this. Actually, when you look at it, the first theology and it's very flimsy, that starts coming out about anti-gay theology starts in the late 1970s and really the early 1980s. There's no theology around this. So I knew it couldn't have been a theological decision, but still you have to prove it. You can't just say, well, I've looked at all this history and it's not possible. And so what we decided, Ed, my research partner, and I decided to go back to Yale University, where the translation notes for the Revised Standard Version of the Bible were kept, and to go through those archives. And it ended up being about 130,000 documents that we went through in 5 days. We went through 94 boxes of documents, paper documents, and 22 rolls of microfilm with about 1,500 documents on each microfilm. And so for days and days and days, we didn't see anything. And then finally, we found a letter that somebody had written to the head of the translation team saying, I think you made a mistake. And the short of that is that the head of the translation team, after seeing this theological discussion from this person, a 5-page letter, as to why this was not accurate, said, you're right, we made a mistake. Perhaps it should be not homosexuals, but those who participate in homosexual practices. And then the person pushed back again and said, no, it's not people that participate in homosexual practices. It's people that participate in homosexual vices. And at the time, vices would have meant a crime, like homosexual rape. And so the head of the translation team said, you're right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this into consideration. And when we do a revision of the Bible, by contract, 10 years from then, we will look at this. And so Ed and I saw all these records. So we knew that they made a decision in 1969, 10 years after this letter, to change homosexuals to sexual perverts. But by that time, 3 other Bibles, the New Living Bible, the New Living Translation, the New American Standard, and the NIV had all started their translation process, and they all used the RSV as their base text, all of them. So the problem was already there. So what I'm going to do, so we proved it, but what I'm going to do with you today is kind of go through the first 5 chapters of the book unbelievably quickly. And so what I want to do is put into context how bodies were seen, male and female relationships were seen, procreation, and possibly these verses. But there's not a lot on these verses until we get to the 20th century. So let's start in the Old Testament. So the Old Testament is written from the point of view of tribes in the ancient Near East, and they all had certain things in common. And as uncomfortable as it is for some people to hear, the Hebrews were a tribe in that area, and they were polytheistic, and they had certain beliefs about procreation. Everybody on the planet did. That procreation, that a man contained all of the seed, that a man planted a seed inside a woman, they weren't starting to think about bodies yet. That would come, but they had very strict views of male and female relationships, male superiority, female inferiority, and these came from 12,000 years ago at the beginning of the agricultural revolution. You know, bigger story, but patriarchy had been in place for a very long time, for millennia by that point. So when they are writing their creation story, people can discuss when those stories were written, but we know they were written from an ancient Near East perspective. So we know that they had certain views on procreation and male and female relationships. So we know they had a agricultural view of planting the seed. We know they were patrilineage societies. We know they were patriarchal. And so when the Old Testament verses in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Genesis are written, their perspective. What did they know about bodies? Nothing. They knew almost nothing about bodies. There would have been no conversations about bodies. It would have been just who is male, who is female. There would have been no, certainly, conversations about body parts. Body part conversations don't start happening till the 1600s, really. So then the next step we step into is early antiquity. So that is the Archaic Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, all of that. So now we're going to step into early antiquity. And early antiquity is 4th century BC to the 4th century. Now what happens here is it's classical Greece, ancient Rome, and medicine starts. So this becomes important. So in the context of the New Testament, we have the beginnings of medicine. So we have philosophers and we have ancient doctors looking at bodies and male and female and procreation. And did they get it right? Absolutely not. Until about 1600, the belief was that a female was an inferior version of a male. And whether she didn't develop as a fetus or there were, body humors. So it's all of this, the body fluids that we can talk about, the black bile, the green bile, the blood and the phlegm. That balance or imbalance of those fluids in a body is what made a person male and female, not their body parts. Nobody was thinking about genitalia to define body parts. That was not a thought. What a woman's body parts were was the exact inverse of a man's body parts, but of course the inferior version. So a male has a penis and a woman has an internal penis, an inverted penis. She keeps all her body parts on the inside because she's cold. She's cold and she's dry. So we have to keep all of these body parts on the inside, and a man's body parts, because of the balance of his fluids, all his body parts are on the outside because he's hot and he's wet. So this is what makes people male or female: how developed they are in the womb, how wet or dry they are, how hot or cold they are. Not body parts. We're not talking penises and vaginas and genitalia, not at all. And these were ancient doctors. So this is what they thought male and female were. And at the same time, as Christianity is just starting, it's incredibly heavily influenced by Stoicism. And Stoicism is all about control. So you control your sexual passions, you control your lust, everything has to have a purpose, sex has to be towards procreation, and there's absolutely a merger of the culture that's around people and their faith. But for the first 400 years of Christianity, you'd be hard pressed to say that there was a sexual ethic that was a Christian sexual ethic. It was so merged together with their culture, Stoicism. So the beginnings of Christianity reflect the culture. And that reflection is sex has to be towards procreation, and there should be no passion in sex. There should be no excess lust in sex. So even a man desiring his wife would have been inappropriate. So we're gonna go to the beginning of Christianity, and then for the next 1,000 years, it's the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church rises. You know, the Catholic Church starts to rise, 5th, 6th century, starts to rise in power. The Catholic Church develops canon law. Civil law is going to develop alongside of it, but the church owns canon law. And canon law dictates marriage, family, divorce, procreation, anything along those lines, the church dictates. And so there was no progress, though, in understanding bodies. As far back as 150 years BC, they stopped doing body dissections. So any views of the body were from these old documents from 150 BC. Galen is the doctor of the 2nd century. He's the one that comes up with these body fluids and inverted body parts. That view of human bodies doesn't change until the 16th century. And so the Catholic Church the Roman society didn't allow dissection. So they didn't allow dissections to look inside of bodies. And the Catholic Church didn't allow dissections because they didn't think, you know, if we cut your body open, when you die, where are you going to go? How can you go to heaven? All your body parts are all over the place. So dissections were not allowed. So for the entirety of the medieval period, the Middle Ages, till 1500, no one was looking inside of bodies. So the view of male and female was consistent. Females were the inferior version of males. Female bodies were the lesser version of males. Everything was tucked on the inside. Patriarchy stayed the same. And the entire view of conception was the same. A male planted his seed inside a woman's body. All of a human baby was inside of his semen. So he plants that in the fertile planting ground of a woman. So a woman was not a significant person. She was very, very inferior. And it became crucial to know that a man placed the entirety of his seed in a place where procreation would happen. Because through all of history, all of this chunk of history, what you have to hold in context is no lust, no passion, and sex has to be towards procreation. This starts to lighten up a little bit with the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, the Scientific Revolution. And what's happening there is the church is losing power, and science and humanism and reasoning is starting to take. So 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, the views of the church are dying a little bit, but still, sex is towards procreation. But what happens in about the 18th century, during this Age of Enlightenment, people in Western Europe and certainly in the United States, it's reflected in a lot of our writings, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's all Enlightenment philosophy. People start to feel a little bit more freedom in expressing who they are maybe politically, but expressing also who they are sexually. And so we start to see at the very beginning of the 1700s, subcultures of men, we won't see women, subcultures of men that seem to be attracted to other men. In England, they call them mollies. In other countries, in Germany, they call them warm brothers. Other places call them sodomites. But the really interesting thing about this period is people see them. And although we're starting to be very aware of medicine, medical reasons for things, it's going to take another 150 years for doctors to say, I wonder what it is about certain people that makes them attracted to the same sex. So they're noticed at the beginning of the 1700s, but nobody asks the question of why. Why is this? It would only have been seen of as non-procreative, excessive sex. Anyone can do that. But at the time, there was not a reality of these people are only attracted or primarily attracted to the same sex. What I find fascinating is that it does take another century and a half for doctors to say why. So in 1844, a doctor in Vienna writes a book, and he says, why is this that there are some people that do sexual perversion? That's what he would have seen it, because it's not procreative and it seems to involve lust. So he comes up with some ideas, and he says, there are several kinds of sexual perversions. There's bestiality. There's rubbing your genitals on the leg of another person. They called that lesbianism, but it included both sexes. There is masturbation, and there's sodomy. And he says, another interesting piece was about the early part of the 1700s in all of Europe, masturbation became a huge issue. Someone wrote a paper about why masturbation was this horrible sin, but thank goodness he also sold the cure, you know, the original snake oil salesman. And then over the next 200 years, that gained a lot of traction. And almost every sin or sickness or pathology was assigned to masturbation. So eventually, where does homosexuality come from? It comes from masturbation. Where does epilepsy come from? It comes from masturbation. Where does death come from? It comes from masturbation. So there's this period where the worst sin anybody could do for over 200 years was masturbate. Not procreative, self-satisfying, fits the bill. So this person in 1844, his name is Heinrich Kahn. He writes a book called, first book, there's other books that will come along, called Psychopathia Sexualis. And he says, there are people that seem to be like this. And he is the first scientist that observes and names. Big step in human sexuality. Big, big step, because nobody else had, well, they may have seen, but he takes it to the scientific level and he observes and he names. And then very slowly, in tiny pockets, and only in Germany, because Germany had the most lax censorship laws in all of Europe. If you had tried to write about same-sex sex acts in England at that time, well, you couldn't have. It wouldn't have been published. It wouldn't have been published. It wouldn't have been sold. But Germany was discussing this because Germany was unifying. We had very conservative Prussia. We had very liberal Bavaria. They're trying to unify all these 30 plus states and duchies, et cetera, into unified Germany. And they've got the sodomy laws are all over the place. So they are discussing it. They're the first people that are discussing it. So they discuss the sodomy laws. And as they're discussing the sodomy laws, people that are that thing, whatever that thing is, start saying, but I feel pretty normal. And I don't want this to be criminalized because I don't feel like a criminal. I just want people to, like, I feel like I'm born this way. And if you criminalize this, then you're criminalizing me for something that I'm born with. And that doesn't sound right. So a man named Karl Ulrichs comes along in the 1860s and he starts writing. And he is indeed a gay man, but we wouldn't have said that at the time. We wouldn't have even said homosexual. He called himself an Urning. So he says, I am this. This is who I am. I've always been this way. And he starts writing. And over time, he writes 12 pamphlets that, because the censorship laws are low, get out. And because they get out, people can read them and people can see themselves. And then people start telling their own stories. It's just like today, right? You hear stories of other people, you identify with those stories, and then a doctor comes along, Richard von Krafft-Ebing, and he starts writing a series of books on sexual pathology, again named Psychopathia Sexualis, and he writes 12 volumes. And the reason he keeps writing volumes is every time he writes a book and he publishes it, people say, that's me. I see myself in there. He's writing not just about homosexuality, he's writing about fetishes and kinks, and people are saying, I'm not the only one. There's other people out there. So in Germany, in this pocket, people start discussing sexuality. And as those books creep out to other countries, they are censored highly. There's a case in England where a man wanted to bring in Psychopathia Sexualis, and to a person that special ordered it, he never put it on display in his bookshop. He did the transaction in a closed room in his home, and the bookseller was still fined and sent to prison for that. So everything is happening in Germany, and it's concentrated in Germany, and they're collecting tens of thousands of documents on non-heterosexual people. And then what happens is the Third Reich comes in and destroys all of that, destroys all of the documents, sends the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the first sexologists fleeing Germany, because in majority, they are German Jews. And so they start going to England, they start going to the United States, and they are not getting a good reception, because certainly in the United States, we didn't like Germans and we didn't like Jews. So they didn't speak up. So all of this progression that had been happening since the 1850s, 60s, and collected, died, done. And it was highly censored. Now there's a case I want to talk about here. And also, so where is sexuality? We know women's bodies are different. We start to understand that their bodies are different, but now their biology makes them inferior. They're not as strong. Their biology makes them inferior. We start to understand that before they had thought that a woman had to come to climax. For 1,500 years, they thought this, because she released something that would make the man's seed grow. That's all gone away. Now they realize that a woman doesn't need to come to climax, and through cultural progression, she now, instead of, for 1,500 years, she's been the lusty one, the temptress, the person that always dragged the poor man into sexual sin. Well, now she becomes the virginal one. Roles flip, but still, women are inferior. Patriarchy is still entrenched in society. And there's still a problem with non-procreative sex, and there's still a problem with sex that is passionate. So now I'm going to bring in something in England, which I was talking about with Chris the other day, and I just happened to bring this topic up. So the information starts creeping out to England, and the case that gets this publisher sent to prison is called the Bedborough case. So they're not talking about it, and this is in the 1880s. So also in the 1880s, not talking about human sexuality, but in London, then for the last 100 years, there had been homosexuals called Mollies. And the word Molly comes from, the Greek word for effeminate. And it's also, these men are acting like women. They're dressing like women. They're acting like women. They're being penetrated like women. So they're kind of ignoring them, but the problem is becoming more apparent. So this is one of your Salvation Army cases where I'm going to make sure I get the names right. So this is your case of the maiden tribute of modern Babylon. So we were talking about this the other day, and you're going to be so surprised of how it crisscrosses the gay legislation issue, or at this time, homosexual issue. So within your tradition, the head of the Salvation Army, William Booth, and his wife, Catherine, they are very involved in the trafficking of children in London. And then the daughter-in-law gets involved at Florence, and the son, Bramwell, gets involved in it. And they want to, so this is 1885. Since the 1880s, people have been trying to pass legislation to stop the trafficking of children, to stop the prostitution of children. There was a huge concern in England at the time that white children were being even kidnapped and sold into Muslim and African countries as sex slaves. So all of this was going on, but the legislation never seemed to pass. So they brought it to the parliament in 1880, they brought it again in 81, they brought it again in 83, they brought it again in 84, and they could never get traction. And one of the reasons they could never get traction was because the age of consent was 12. And there were men that wanted to have sex with 12-year-olds, and the 12-year-olds wouldn't testify against them and couldn't testify against them. And they wanted to keep the age of consent low. And so they kept fighting the age of consent. Well, then the Salvation Army partnered up with William Steed, and they said, come into the streets with us. Come into the streets with us and see what is going on. And William Steed went into the streets with them and saw the problems of trafficking. And you know the story. He pretends to buy a child, a 13-year-old child, to show how easy it is to buy a child into prostitution. And the uproar in all of England, because it gets published, a 4-piece series gets published in the Pall Mall Gazette. And it is that finally inspires the people of England to say, we have got to pass this legislation that protects children. Great idea. So the legislation starts to move, and it's all about protecting children. So it's introduced in the House of Lords. And I don't know if the Australian Parliament works the same way, but it makes its way through. It goes through the first reading, it goes through the second reading, it goes into committee, it goes to the third reading, and each of these ways, whatever corrections are made are made. And so as it's going through these readings, it then passes over to the House of Commons side. And it is the night before vacation, the night before spring break. Everybody's going home. It's August 5th, 1885. And it's passing through, and it's nighttime, and most of the legislators have gone home. And there is this man named Henry Labouchere. He's English, though. He's an Englishman. And he has this reputation. How much time do I have, Chris? Give me a minute thing.
Yeah,
Tell me.
we did start 15 minutes late, so probably another 10 or 14 minutes.
Okay, I can do this. So it starts passing through, and Labouchere has a reputation. He has a reputation for throwing a wrench in things. Like if he doesn't want something to pass, he'll tack on some ridiculous thing to it. Or if he wants the conversation to just go on endlessly, we call it filibustering here in the United States. I don't know what you call it, but it's someone that I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to tack on ridiculous caveats to it just to make sure it never gets through committee. So it goes through first reading, it goes through second reading, it comes into the committee, and it's late at night. And William Stead has written to Labouchere, and he said, not only is child prostitution a problem in London, homosexuals are a problem in London too. I'm seeing it on the streets. So he says, here's some suggested words for that amendment. And Labouchere adds those 30 words into the amendment. And what those 30 words do say, homosexuality, consensual, and even in private, is a criminal act. And there's no discussion. There's zero discussion about this. It gets tacked on in committee. It gets passed through committee. And when it goes through committee, there's almost no discussion in the papers when it comes out. And so this amendment is tacked on to this child prostitution amendment, and almost nobody notices it. But starting in 1885, and for the next 82 years, consensual same-sex sex in private will be criminalized in England. And that makes a big impact on other countries that are looking at England. And so Oscar Wilde, when he gets prosecuted in 1888, that's the law he got caught under. Alan Turing, you know, from the Enigma machine, who stopped the World War II from proceeding for 2 more years by solving the Enigma, the German coding system, he gets caught under that and gets sent to jail too, and essentially gets chemically castrated and commits suicide. You can't imagine the number of people that get caught under this amendment, and there was no discussion of it, no discussion at all. So that's just a piece I wanted to bring up about the Salvation Army of the United States. So the Salvation Army in England, these discussions are going on very slowly. People are starting to, what is this thing that people are doing? So Freud is the first one at the turn of the 1900s that says, you know, sex is not just about procreation, and enjoying sex is not bad. Like, this is the stuff that makes people happy. So he starts a different conversation about sex. And within the next 20 or 30 years, heterosexual sex that starts to get unhinged slowly from procreation, but more quickly from control. So we see, like in the United States, we see the Roaring 20s, where people are more sexually expressive. And so heterosexuals are starting to be allowed not to follow these strict rules, which have been followed for 1900. Sex has to be towards procreation. Sex can't be enjoyed. Sex is to be controlled. There's to be no lust in it. Heterosexuals are finding their way loose from this. Homosexuals stay bound in it. When there's something that you say is appropriate, you've got to find the inappropriate one. So starting in the 20s, we start to see homosexuality discussed as a crime again, not quite as a mental illness again, but a crime, certainly a crime. Like, they're everywhere. There are a bunch of sex panics that happen in the United States. Unfortunately, the United States seems to lead all of the bad movements. We politicize everything. We make everything fantastic and oversized. The sex panics really take a grip in the late 1920s. So here we are in the 1920s. We don't know who these homosexuals are, but they're after children. We know that. We don't know if the pathologies in their body. We don't know if their body parts are just formed differently. We don't know if it's maybe in their head, but we're criminalizing it. So now it's the 1930s. And this team from the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, I know from going through the paperwork, they worked on 1 Corinthians 6:9 through 10 between 1935 and 1937, and that places it specifically for me. So when they look out into the culture and they say, other people have said, what is the worst sexual thing you could do? For 1,500 years, it had been have non-procreative sex that was out of control, their view. Passionate, non-procreative sex. Then for 200 years, it's worst thing we can see in the culture, masturbation. Next worst thing we can see in the culture, homosexuality. So it made total sense that the translation team sitting there, wanting to modernize the Bible, wanting to create a version of the Bible that people could understand. That was the point of it, to make it modern language. They looked in the culture and they said, what is the thing that's going on in the culture sexually that is crime and seems very perverted? We didn't know who homosexuals were, and they labeled it homosexuality. Signed off, 1941, never a concern about it again. It's published in 1946 in the New Testament of the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, comes out in 1952. The whole Bible, RSV, comes out in 1952. In the United States, right in the middle of the McCarthy era. And in the McCarthy era, the communists were everywhere. The communists were under parked cars. They were behind bushes. They were, they were trying to grab your children off the playground. Communists were everywhere, but so are homosexuals. So these two words get conflated, and homosexuals, they're out to destroy the family. Communists are out to destroy the family. Communists are out to destroy America. Homosexuals are out to destroy America. It all gets conflated. And the next Bibles are, and it's criminalized. Homosexuality is criminalized now. And so it made sense. Nobody seemed to argue it. What are the things that send you to hell? Adulterers, robbers, drunkards, homosexuals, all these really criminal people that just do bad stuff. And we still don't understand what homosexuality is. And now that by the time 1968 comes around, where the RSV team is now looking at the suggestions, now in their files, they have this letter written in 1959 by a man who we now know as Reverend David, who was 21 at the time and a seminary student going through the pastorate track for the United Church of Canada. He wrote an incredible letter. I knew when I read it, I knew when I found it, and I knew when I read it, I knew he was gay. There was no way a straight person in 1959 could have had this insight and sensitivity towards what homosexuality was. And he laid out such a good case that the head of the translation team said, I'm going to take this letter and put it in the file. And when they come back to the file in 1969, there's only 13 pages attached to that consideration. Like, we need to look at this first, and there's still in the margins 13 pages attached. No one else had written an objection. And those 13 pages are the 4 letters back and forth between Reverend David and the head of the translation team. People didn't object because it made sense. We didn't know who homosexuals were, but we knew they were criminals. We knew by then they were mentally ill. So of course they're going to go to hell. So, but Stonewall had happened. Gay people were starting to come out of the closet. And there was something in Luther Weigel that said, our suggestions 10 years ago were those who participate in homosexual practices, or David said, those who participate in homosexual vices. And Luther Weigel says, no, it's neither of those, because it's not about homosexuals. It's about sexual use. It's about sexual abuse. And he changes it, not a great choice of words, but he changed it to sexual perverts, of which can include, yes, indeed, heterosexuals, right? So it should have been something like the message says, those who use and abuse sex, those who use and abuse others. But the thing I find so interesting is we have let, and this, I will wrap it up here, we have let heterosexuals get out from this bondage of what appropriate sex is in the Bible. Appropriate sex is sex towards procreation, sex without pleasure, sex totally controlled, a stoic way of seeing sex. And in part of the medieval period, even virginity was seen better than marriage and sex. Origen, one of the early church fathers, is said to have castrated himself so that he wouldn't be sexually, entertained. And so all over the place with sex, but sex was bad unless you procreated. There were portions of Christian sects which also believed that you shouldn't even have sex. Like, where was the next generation going to come from? I do not know, but you shouldn't have sex. And so, but somehow heterosexuals let themselves walk out of that bondage of what the Bible has been interpreted as, so that heterosexuals are now allowed to have non-procreative sex. You know, you can see the studies, and most heterosexuals have non-procreative sex. And we can actually enjoy ourselves when we have sex. That would have been absurd in the first century. But we have taken homosexuals and kept them in the bondage of that those first century words and thoughts. So it's interesting. And the reason we have let heterosexuals march happily forward and kept homosexuals in bondage is nobody probably, the Bible itself, people would have understood that it was misinterpreted, but it gets misinterpreted, and in 3 other versions, and right there, and then in the New Living Translation, homosexuality gets added in 5 more places in the Bible. In the New Living Translation, and in the 1980s, and actually till March of 2014, that Bible has been the #1 Bible in the US, #1 selling Bible, with homosexuality in several translations and several spots. Ed and I went and saw those translation notes too. No theology associated behind it. Like, I'm looking into the culture. What do I see in the culture that reflects non-procreative, abusive sex? Homosexuality. And it gets duplicated and duplicated and duplicated until in the 80s, it becomes highly politicized. So there's no worse hell or greater force than when religion and politics merge together and they reinforce each other. So in the culture and in medicine, homosexuality is no longer a crime, no longer a mental illness, should have been taken out of that translation, but now it becomes a sin. So it's not this abusive sexual act that's a sin, it's homosexuality. So we change from this behavior to a group of people. And so that's what I'm working on, is exposing this, carrying it through history, showing people where the mistranslation happened. And it's only 50 years old. It can be undone. And the response that we're getting to this work is phenomenal. And if I die today, at least people will keep repeating that the word homosexual didn't get into the Bible until 1946. And of that, I am proud. Questions?
Kathy, thank you so much. You've given us an incredible amount to think and ponder over. And we do have some questions.
Okay.
For those who have sent through their questions, we're going to get through as many as we can. I'm going to start with the easy ones, Kathy, that I'm hoping they're going to be easy for you anyway. One of the first questions comes for our Spanish-speaking participants today. What is the book title going to be in Spanish? You mentioned it was.
Oh, you're going to make me say my Spanish terribly well. Terrible. Atravesando el Canyon sin puente. So walking the canyon without a bridge.
Wow.
And it's already up in ebook and audio. I had a wonderful Spanish actress do it for me. And now the indexing took time, and it's now into formatting. And as soon as I get the formatting back, we widen the spine, and within 2 weeks, the Spanish one will be up. And that is huge.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. That's so great.
And I'm going to have to learn how to say the book name with the right accents.
Yeah, I can't speak a word of Spanish, so you're already miles ahead of me.
I can do menu Spanish really well, but that's about it.
Life skills, right?
Yeah.
So another question around release dates really was 1946, the movie. You mentioned that a few times, and I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that in a moment. But one of the pressing questions that has come through is, when will that be released, and how are people going to be able to view it? Is it going to be like a big cinema release?
Oh,
what can we expect?
So it'll probably come out in February, March, but it goes through all of the film circuits, right?
Right.
So it'll go through and see if it can get picked up. So it's very similar in status and release in terms of like Pray Away. One of my friends was one of the principals in Pray Away, Yvette Cantu Schneider. She's actually an employee of mine. And so when they made that film, they didn't know who would pick it up. And it went through the film festivals, and it got picked up by Netflix. And so Netflix released it in 190 countries and 90 something languages.
Yeah.
And so the thought, if it follows the same track, because it's the same sort of thing, it will probably end up doing the same thing. It'll go through the film festivals, and then it'll get picked up by someone, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon. It'll get picked up. It's the kind of film that people are looking for now. So somewhere next spring, and the book will be out, same thing, somewhere early next spring. And we're trying to get everything out at the same time so that they support one another. And I will tell you, the people that are really responding to the film are young people.
Yeah.
That's just a different medium for them.
Yeah, for everyone following along, you can find the 1946 movie Instagram page. And I know I found it a great resource to share with people that are interested in learning. So go find the Instagram page, folks, and then get ready for the release next year. So this is probably quite one that's probably a lot of people are grappling with. So from a conservative viewpoint, most people that are reading the Bible from that sort of conservative lens wouldn't accept the concept of ideology having played and culture having played such a large part in shaping that. So how do we have those conversations with people? How do we help them, maybe, if, and is it possible even for us to help people transition from that one way of thinking that, no, this is it?
I have found that building a solid case of context before I touch the Holy Grail of the Bible has been very successful, very successful. So I don't get to the Bible until chapter 9.
Yeah.
And by then you are reading and you're saying, I never knew this. I never knew this is how they saw bodies and sex. Because the problem is, we stand in the 20th or 21st century, wherever people are choosing to stand, and we look back to the first and we say, they knew what we knew. And when you crawl through history and you understand what they did and did not know, it starts to make a lot of sense. And I have had so many people tell me that the first book and the timelines that I do on video have been the thing that has convinced them, even gay people.
Yeah.
And so I'm already talking to people that they tell me that I need to put my butcher paper down and get into technology. I mean, I was like, stop. I am 65. I get to carry around butcher paper if I want to. And so they say, no, you need to like make these great PowerPoints. So over this trip, I talked to someone who's incredibly gifted at it to help me show people the places in history where it changed and to drive them with a 10-minute message to the book so they get information, but to hit them in the face and say, this is not just about the Bible.
Yeah.
This is about culture. This is about science. This is about many other things and interpretation. And I have found it's really successful. But there are some people that don't want to know.
Yeah.
They don't want to know.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
I find it far more successful than let's sit down and talk about Arsena Koite and Malakoi. Far more successful.
Have you been able at all to have conversations with or approach so the companies behind the translations, really, I guess, like NRSV and NIV, and have you been able to be in contact with them at all and go, hey, these are my findings, what do you think?
So most of the people on those translation teams are dead, not effective. And so, but we did try, so the latest translation, which is the most popular amongst the conservatives, is the NIV or the ESV.
Oh, yeah.
And the ESV is the most offensive. The ESV in 1 Corinthians 6:9 through 10 says, those who participate in homosexual acts, I think, or practices. But the footnote says, the active and passive partners in a consensual homosexual relationship. That is not what the verse says at all. And that's what the ESV says. So Wayne Grudem, who is a man that in my head goes hiss when I say his name. And we tried to contact him. So at first I tried to contact him and I thought, yeah, my name is too searchable. So then we had Ed contact him and to say, you know, we've looked at the RSV, the New Living Translation, the NASB, the NIV, and we looked at all these translation notes, and the only ones we haven't seen are the ESV, and we'd love to see them. And we got a very curt letter back saying, this is proprietary information. No, you're not going to see it. The only version of the Bible that will not allow us to see their translation notes is the ESV.
Wow.
And that will be in the book. A copy of the email he sent back to us saying, like, go away, no.
Yeah, that feels very political, doesn't it?
Could be.
Yeah. So we have a question here from our participants. It's Salvation Army specific, but we're hoping you might be able to speak into a little bit. So one of the issues that is often put forward as the reason that I guess keeps the Salvation Army from becoming more inclusive and affirming of the LGBTQI community is that we're an international church, which we are. We're active in a number of endless number of countries, it seems. And the concern that is put to everyone that goes with that is what happens if Asia and Africa become inclusive? Like, what's the impact there? Can you suggest for us a way that we can address that barrier, I guess?
Yeah, actually at the TRP conference, I was asked to facilitate a panel discussion with Jim Brownson, who wrote Bible, Gender, Sexuality. He's from the Reformed Church in America, and with Ashley Geffen-Duffers, and she is from the United Methodist Church. So Reformed Church in America is American, and the UMC is it's a global church. So we had a conversation, and I talked to them beforehand, so I knew how to interview them. And what happens in a lot of those denominations, and the reason we picked those two denominations is the RSC just voted 2 weeks ago in their conference to include LGBTQ people. And this has been a long conversation, and it just happened. And the UMC, United Methodist Church, they've been delaying it because of COVID for 2 years. So they've missed 2 years of conference, and they're hoping in 2022 to have conference. And so what it's not as easy, and I don't know what it is in yours, but it's not as easy just to say, you go your way, I go my way, because there are many other facets. There are church buildings, there are congregational assets, there are missional programs, like people support missionaries. And so suppose you want to support a missionary and your church goes affirming, like, what do you do with the mission? All these conversations are going on. And what we came down to is, it is difficult. It is difficult. And the only way through this is to educate and to do relationship. And Jim Brownson says, go to a meal with people you don't agree with. I mean, he has been the head of the RCA seminary as a dean, and he is one of the select delegates in the RCA. And his son came out as gay, which is what made him reassess.
Yeah.
And so he says the biggest thing is relationship, but it is complicated. It's complicated because you have all these other pieces associated with it. And the other thing I was surprised at with the UMC is I drew these lines that said, America wants inclusion and Africa doesn't, right? No way. And it turns out that's not true, because sometimes people associate with the church with, these are the people that take care of us. These are the people that are there when we're in need, and we don't want to lose them. And so sometimes some congregations and some countries that you would never think, African congregations that you would never think would go along this, they say, this aspect of you caring for us is more important than this other issue. And that surprised me. So it's not simple, but that's what I learned from them is do relationship and do education. My piece in this is to, I think I'm producing a really good resource with this, but relationship. And hearing stories, my goodness, Marta Maria's story, how sad is this to hear? There's people have got to have compassion. So relationships, stories, education.
Yeah. One final question from our crew. So obviously with the Maidenhead Tribute and the Criminalisation Act that sort of came out of that, from a Salvation Army point of view, we've only ever heard really a very positive spin on that and how amazing our work was in making things better. Where can folk go to read more about that so that we can be more informed really about our own path?
Just Google the Labouchere Amendment, Labouchere Amendment, Henri Bouchere, 1885. And you can see how it passed through. And I will tell you that when you read about the Labouchere Amendment, they don't make a big deal about the Salvation Army. And when you read about the, what's the name of it? The Maiden Tribute, they don't talk about the Labouchere Amendment. It's like these two have not found each other yet. So there was this really wonderful thing the Salvation Army did, and somebody just totally messed it up in the final hearing late at night with no discussion. That's amazing. 82 years of impact on the LGBT community in England because of that.
Wow.
That's stunning.
It is. It really is. It really is. Thank you so much for being so willing to answer our questions. I'm going to hand back
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Kathy.
You're welcome. I always love participating with the Salvation Army. I think the ones that, I've participated with several times know that. Yeah, I like working with you.
We absolutely love working with you, Kathy. It's been a delight. And as we've just picked up, I can safely say that there wouldn't be one person in this room or watching on YouTube who would have had any idea that the Salvation Army's work with the Maiden Tribute had any connection to the criminalisation of homosexuality that caused problems for people like us for countless generations.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. So much to take away from your presentation, but that's great. Yeah, you've been a real blessing. You kicked us off for our very first Included conference a year ago, and here you are again. So thank you for joining us, Kathy, and we'll all keep a lookout for the book, of course, Forging a Sacred Weapon, How the Bible Became Anti-Gay.
Right.
Thank you. Well, we have had such a great time that we are running a little bit behind. So I'll keep the announcements short, and then we're going to break off into some breakout groups. We have been overwhelmed by the response to this gathering. All of our 6 sessions are very well attended. We really understand that we've hit something significant for people who are looking to understand more about what it means to be a safe, inclusive church. If you're looking for more information or resources, you can check out our website, which is www.includedpage.com. or our Facebook page, which is the same, included page. And if you've got any questions about anything you've heard today or about inclusion generally, you can contact us at team@includedpage.com. Now, we do have one question, one request as we move through the sessions, and that is if you're able to support the work of the Included team as we put on events like this. There are costs involved in running this webinar, technology costs and some costs around speakers and presenters. So if you're able to help, it would be fantastic. We've covered around 65% of our costs so far. If you're able to help us a little bit more, that'd be awesome. You can go to includedpage.com/donate, or you can just check out includedpage.com and you'll see a little icon there to help us out. That's about all from me. We're going to be back in a few minutes to kick off breakout groups. If you want to stick around, please do. There's absolutely no requirement. If you want to go off now and grab your morning coffee before our next session, do that, because the next session is going to be another fantastic one. We've heard so much remarkable history from Kathy Baldock, and coming up next, we're going to hear a little bit about why it's not so wise to ask, what does the Bible say? Professor Dale B. Martin is a world-renowned Bible scholar and theologian, and he's going to be sharing some of his incredible work and his findings that can help us rediscover, renew, reimagine how we look at the Bible and how we find safety and inclusion in the words of scriptures rather than judgment and exclusion. So do if you haven't registered, jump onto the website and register for Dale B. Martin. It's coming up in about an hour and a half now. Right now, though, it's breakout group time, so stick around if you want to be a part of a breakout group and chat further. Right now, a benediction. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you in session 2.
Words create worlds. God spoke in Genesis, his language distilling into stars, oceans, planets. And God still speaks today.
Always innovating and constantly creating. He does not bend to cultural progress, rather he leads the way.
Not innovation for innovation's sake, but the plan of an upside-down kingdom, when the last shall be first, and the dinner table set for the unlikeliest of guests.
His magnificence draws in the outsider and swings wide the doors for any and for all.
Religious elites look on, shaking their heads at the lavish outpouring of outrageous grace.
Words create worlds. God spoke in Genesis, his language distilling into stars, oceans, planets. And God still speaks today.
And his voice echoes and new constellations dance into view. May we have minds that stretch wide enough to perceive the vastness of his imagination.
And may we have ears to hear, unoffended by the greatness of his grace, even when its boundaries venture further than our own. Amen.